dire tidings in the world. You've got a variety of very portentous things happening around the world, starting with North Korea. This was something that you pointed out to me, Lucas. Looks like tensions are rising here in this clip. What we've got, some part of the DMZ that has had an attack on it. Is that what's happening here?
It is, and Rusty actually brought this to attention this morning. I saw that Kim Jong-un had declared that he was going to blow these roads up, but I didn't see that it had happened, and not until you sent this, Rusty. Rusty, you were stationed here. Any thoughts that this brings to you before we dig into some of the other things going on?
Yeah, it just reminds me of a few memories I have from the time when I was stationed there, and I did spend a few just under 1 month in South Korea when I was in the Marine Corps, and I was stationed just 12 miles south of what you're seeing now on the screen, which is the DMZ, or the Demilitarized Zone. And when I was stationed there, my unit actually made a visit to the DMZ and had pictures of themselves in front of the fence that you're seeing on the South Korean side. And I remember. This, when I was stationed in South Korea, is right around 2006, when North Korea was starting to have its very first, big talks of nuclear armament and abilities. And I remember my commanding officer said to us when we were in one of our evening get-togethers, he says, if North Korea decides to attack, we are to be only a speed bump in their advance until the rest of the South Korean forces can advance to us. And so it was just interesting that was the way they were looking at it, and now they're seeing that they're blowing up the roads or their way to advance into the country. And what our worries was, they were just going to advance in and just try to roll over us.
Thinking about why we had a war in Korea following the World War II. And it's important to get back to that because we had many unresolved issues that occurred in the wake of World War II. And we're fighting a proxy war with Russia now. We fought with Russia in all these various locations. That war has seemed to be unending, despite whether we called it the Cold War or the war in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in all of these other locations. It all goes back to Russia. And I think we also have to bear in mind, I would say, in my humble opinion, the reason that we used our nuclear bombs in Japan without warning the Japanese was not because the stated reason that we wanted to end the war quickly, but we wanted to beat Russia to Japan. And the United States was already looking to get a foothold all throughout the world and increase, to open up markets and to secure markets all over the world. And what was going on at the time was Russia had the Eastern Front was closed and Russia was turning to their Western Front. And they were very adamant that Japan had been a security threat to them in the past, and that they wanted to go settle old scores. And they had a massive military. They lost more soldiers by far than any of the other Allied powers in World War II, and they were turning to the West because they wanted to go, in their words, to increase their security. However, whatever euphemism that is for.
A couple things come to mind on the Russian front. Remember when Mitt Romney said that Russia was the biggest threat, and he got laughed out of the room? That wasn't that long ago. Remember how sentiment has changed?
I mean, and Mitt Romney, I don't actually remember that happening, but Mitt Romney in some ways is called a neocon, a war hawk. Mitt Romney, I believe one of his top aides, along with Hunter Biden, was on the Gazprom board, and so he was looking to. I don't know. I worry that as long as we do not apply the Monroe Doctrine.
Well, here it is right here, just in case you forgot it. So this was the quote: "Russia, without question, is our number one geopolitical foe." Mitt Romney said that back in, what was that, 2012.
Well, and this is right whenever the fight for grass is exploding, and also on the wake of the discovery of fracking, and the United States all of a sudden seems to have a solution for the energy crunch going on in Europe. So 2012, what happened shortly after this? 2014, the coup, one of the first revolutions in the Ukraine. And leading into this, the Russia had been had been, oh, I don't know, I don't want to say starting wars, but had been in a war with Georgia, and this all goes also back to NATO. But when we buy the line of I'll just say the war hawks. And again, coming out of World War II, there were many people who said we cannot trust Russia, and there was I can't remember.
Well, wait a minute. In World War II, wasn't Russia was like the ally, right? Like this Lend Lease and all this was happening.
They were the ally, but there were huge fears about Bolshevism and the Soviet system, fascism versus capitalism. But it's also interesting to go back to those times and look at what the leaders of the United States. Now I can't remember some of their names. McCloy and Forestov and the other wise men. What they were very much concerned about with regards to now I can't even say it, Soviets, and fascist and Bolshevist or anything that was not America. They were very concerned about secret police. And we've carried on these narratives about communism and fascism and authoritarianism, but isn't it interesting that the FBI can send secret operatives into January 6th, into I mean, the CIA and the FBI both have all of these secret black ops. So I would say that in the wake of World War II, and we have realized our fears inside of our own borders. And
yeah, our own agencies have become as bad or worse than the KGB ever was.
Yeah, and it all goes back to expectations. We've allowed our value of privacy to be corroded by not maintaining the distinction between the privacy for individuals, but none for the government. And the democratic aspects of our republics and our union were supposed to be realized not in one person, one vote, which has been the common narrative for so long, but in no secrecy. In no secrecy for the government, because that's what is truly democratic about it. There's also aspects of the judicial system. I wish we had juries, but at the very least, whenever we gave away this notion that the government should be transparent and that sunshine is the greatest disinfectant to government collusion, corrosion, bad government practices, when we gave that up, we opened ourselves up to an absolute abuse of power by the government, and that's where we come. I think we need to talk about other things that are going on now. So, what have we seen recently? Yesterday, or maybe it was a couple of days ago. I caught it on Ron Paul's Liberty Report yesterday, but the military has changed. The DOJ issued a ruling that changes the rules of engagement for our military on U.S. soil now. And so now any of the federal government institutions can call upon our standing military to use lethal force against Americans.
Yeah, I got that clip pulled up right now. So that's this is a recent change. Like, this just happened.
This is a very recent change, and it wasn't by act of Congress. It wasn't by a convention of the states and change. I mean, we don't even the Constitution doesn't allow for a standing army. So I don't know why we always talk about the Constitution so much whenever there are much more powerful institutions like the Department of Justice that can go out and have a closed door meeting and come out and say, oh, well, we need to have this power. And there's something else that has, I mean, there are so many other things that are occurring in the wake of this change.
No, hold on a second. Let's not blow past this too fast, because I want to understand this a little bit better in case you've got some insights that you can share. So when you say that the DOJ did this, I mean, is this at the direction of the current administration? Like, or do they act, I don't know, like extra presidentially? Like, they are operating kind of on their own authority and on their own accord?
I mean, according by my assessment of the Constitution and the shifting window of what we accept, the DOJ was not an original part of the federal government of the agreement between the several states.
No, I got that, but like I'm asking if the president's like a part of this. Like, is this something that is firmly laid at the feet of Joe Biden, President Biden? Is that how this works, or like under what aegis does this governmental agency operate? Are they beholden to the generals, or like what's sort of the chain of command here?
Well, the DOJ is under the executive branch of the government. So, who does?
But that's under Merrick. Is that Merrick Garland? Because he's
so Merrick Garland is the Attorney General and ostensibly leads the DOJ.
And we've had nothing good to say about Merrick Garland lately, right? I mean, we've had various episodes where we've talked about this guy
but I never I mean, I have nothing good to say about William Barr. I think that the Department of Justice operates operates in sync with the State Department, with the CIA, with the Pentagon, and we have created many federal institutions that operate outside of the authority of either the elected executive, the President of the United States, and also outside of the limitations that were supposed to be placed upon them by the legislature. They disseminate whatever information that they want to the legislature. The legislature, operates under the power of the purse. That is a convoluted system, and it doesn't seem that cutting off money to them seems to work. And I mean, we also supposedly are supposed to have Congress declare an act of war to call up the military so that we have a standing military, but that's gone by the wayside. And now the president, or who even knows, because I'm not hearing a lot from the president of the United States of late, and yet it seems that the Secretary of Defense, or as we used to call him, the Secretary of the War Department, has dispatched generals to Israel to quote unquote defend Israel at this time. So I think we have many in federal bureaucracies and institutions that are working together that are outside of Republican or Democratic Republican control. So, and as to what I believe that the wake of this change in the DOJ ruling is, and whatever whatever rationale that the DOJ has come up with, it still hasn't gone before a vote of the legislation or of Congress, and I think this is a problem. So I don't think that it's any coincidence that it comes as we have a release about of information about drones that have been flying over the Pentagon and over Norfolk, Virginia, and the Navy institutions there. Have you did you catch at all any of that information that was dropped?
I think we had a clip on that, right? Wasn't that something that we wanted to pull up?
I tried to find it, but didn't have a lot of time getting ready for the show. But long story short, in In December of 23, there was, for 17 days, there was a, I believe it was called a horde, or several drones.
Oh wait, I know. I got that drone one. Hold on, let me get that pulled up. Keep going.
Yeah.
Then, I'll get it pulled up.
Okay, so if we recall back to 2023, we both had a quote unquote Chinese weather balloon that flew at 120,000 feet over the United States, over missile silos in the middle of the country and military installations, and they claimed that it was just a weather balloon, but there were concerns that it was a kind of a brilliant, we have the SR-71 that flies over that flies over anti-aircraft missiles and such, and so they were just like, well, we'll just set up a balloon. But there was both that, but there was also all of these drones that came from a mothership, and the line that's being put out, if you dig into the language that's coming, is that the United States military did not have adequate clearance for rules of engagement over United States soil to deal with these drones. So at that point, given that our government is able to keep secrets and is also authorized to lie to us, I have to say, well, is that actually what was happening? Or is the government, is this rationale to give the military power, and is the increased are the powers that have now been given to the military, do they have to do with the upcoming election? Do they have to come with fears about deteriorating security as we lose our bases around the world for the American empire, because we have the front collapsing in Ukraine, we have Iran and other Arab nations beginning to.
I think we have a clip on that collapsing front on the Ukraine front, right? Our friend Scott Ritter, who we've featured before, there's actually a clip here that we'll put in the show notes where some troubling things that are happening on the Ukraine front, and what they're losing something like 7 miles of ground or to that effect. Is that right?
Scott put up this video a couple of days ago, and he is constantly giving interviews on various channels. But at the time that he put this up, the Ukrainian front was collapsing at 7 miles per day. And if anyone's been paying attention to the news that we've been getting back from the Ukraine, if anything, Ukraine is losing more. Vladimir Zelensky first desperately came to the United States a couple of weeks ago to ask for more support. They asked for, of course, the NATO to give them authorization to fire missiles into the interior of Russia to ramp up to escalate the fight. And there was talk about other ways to de-escalate the fight in Russia. And it seems Russia, in response, said that if that were to happen, that they would continue to escalate and they would not take nuclear weapons off the table. So it was at that point that we seem to have withdrawn our notion of escalation, and did not give NATO. Joe Biden did not sign the NATO request for approval to attack deep in the lines of Russia.
And then we've got this post which says there's what the ambassador has been withdrawn.
Yeah, and so that sort of escalation tussle occurred back on September the 13th. and the Russian and the UN ambassadors, as well as Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin gave public remarks and then used his UN and Russian ambassadors to draw the line and communicate that to the United States. And meanwhile, just a couple of days ago, the Russian ambassador did resign his post and leave the United States, and on the heels of warning of nuclear catastrophe. So what we've reached now, I would say, is a point at which the United States empire has a question. Does it escalate to the level of nuclear weapons to continue to hold on to the status quo, or does it turn and circle the wagons? And I I think that nuclear war will be the wrong decision, and so we should be in some ways figuring out where to redraw our boundaries and at what point to circle our wagons.
This is something that I think we've also heard Kennedy talk about, right? Is he's given dire warnings that we shouldn't be messing around with this kind of stuff, that we should not be escalating these tensions and putting the world on the brink of this.
We've seen Kennedy and Trump talk of it. We haven't seen Kamala Harris talk about it, which on my mind,
I think that says a lot of the fact that she hasn't said anything about it.
Yeah, I'd call it disqualifying. But meanwhile, we can't leave Israel and actions that have occurred in Israel out of this equation. So, and of course, Benjamin Netanyahu and members of the Israeli government understand what's going on here, and I would guess that this is part of a greater political movement on their part, is understanding the waning power of the United States, who's long been their defender in their region, and I would, if I take a step back and a long view at what's been going on here, they have been provoking countries on their perimeter in an expectation that the United States would continue to support them. And I think that we can read the actions of the United States in some way as supporting them, but also as trying to rein them back. So when the United States,
I think you can definitely see the sentiment around the country turning against this. I mean, when you have traditionally Democratic voters who are protesting the war on college campuses, I mean, this is the kind of nightmare scenario for the Democrats, is that they find themselves on the wrong side of what would traditionally be something that they would be, aligned with, and they're actually finding themselves at odds on their foreign policy with their traditional voter base.
I absolutely agree, and I think that's the true picture of what is occurring here. Is Israel has lost a great amount of support from even evangelical Christians in the United States who had heretofore seen Israel's struggle as an existential continuation of their own identity. We still see a lot of politicians in the United States who support Israel and seem to be blind to the problems, the realities of what's going on there. But I think there's also something deeper that goes on there, and that goes back to a little bit of our conversation yesterday about ideas of political organization and a departure from previous notions of feudalism and ideas that people are bound to the land. And in some ways, the United States has long been where that new political idea has been embodied, and we see the immigration issue as being forefront in the I don't know, talking points of the various candidates here in the United States. But outside of the United States, Israel is another point at which the idea is being tested that people can move around the world, and people who were who left an area can move back too. I think where Israel gets that wrong is because I think the world understands that at some level. Like the people of the world, we have all these fancy words about democracy, and I don't think anyone talks about democratic republic outside the world. But what does that mean to them? What do they look at the United States and see that they like? And I think that that secrecy or government transparency is one thing, but also the liberty to move around is the other thing. So how do we come to political organization that allows that to happen? And
well, given some of the conversations that we've had with people that live outside of the U.S., and I think that those are always very enlightening conversations when we have those. How much information do people that live around the world actually have about what's happening within the United States? I think it's less than we might know. Even when we spoke with Alex and we asked him how much he knew about Kennedy and how little he knew about the fact that this other person was even running for office. I mean, there's things like this that are occurring that we sort of have, even where we live on X, in our corner of X, where we're seeing certain things. I think that this is not mainstream. This is not easy to have a sense of these things. And I think it's important for us to remember, and when we have these conversations and we put this forward on the show, that most people would not be plugged into these ideas, and that this sort of stuff is not widely known within the world.
Maybe, but I think that the United States has used devious methods. The same devious methods that are now being turned upon us have been long turned on the people around the world through Voice of America, through NGOs, through money that's doled out via the Marshall Plan. Or
so you're saying that you're taking the opposite idea, that this is actually something that's well known throughout the world, that this isn't the fringe thing at all, that that the countries that this has been visited upon know this intimately.
Well, yeah, and I started earlier when I was talking about the DOJ and the changing of the rules of our government against us. I don't, we say conspiracy something. I think inherent in that sometimes is this notion that organizations or groups of people, whether it be corporations, governments, or religions, but groups of people have nefarious ideas. I don't actually ever think that that negative ideas are strong enough to propel and to bind groups together. I think there are different ways of seeing the world and to seeing quote unquote progress or change exist in the world. And I do think that in the wake of World War II, that many Americans saw that capitalism was the answer, even though they didn't really understand what they meant when they said capitalism, and they forgot very quickly that that secrecy and dishonesty were the things that they were fighting against. And this is why I think that authorizing the State Department to have an organization under them, the CIA, that's given the license to lie, is a very big problem, and we need to address that. But at the same time, the goals that they had about talking about representation, talking about having the government represent people, inherent in that is some notion of transparency, and not just transparency, but accountability. And I think that those have been adopted by most of the people of the world. And now, but meanwhile, they understood the sacrifice or the moral high ground that the United States had given up in their concerns about Russia. This is also where I think it's very interesting to to think about our relationship with Russia and how we have constantly failed there. You know, we've talked a little bit in the past about the creation of the dollar-denominated world exchange system that wasn't an actual exchange system because it was dollar denominated. And even though we said that we were creating you know, all of the world currencies could come to a common marketplace and float based on what the value of the currency was. And this was an understanding that there had been too little gold, too little silver in the world before, and that it was an important innovation for governments to be able to fluctuate their amount of currency. But they needed to be able to adjust the rates, the trading rates of those currencies against each other. But we immediately subverted that system by making it dollar denominated. And not only did we take advantage of all the countries of the world that jumped onto that system, but we intentionally excluded Russia from that system from the very get-go. And when Harry Dexter White tried to include the Russians, we wrote him out of American history and called him a traitor. So we need to remember that. And there were heads of state of the United States at the time that said, and dang it, I can't remember who said this. We'll have to look it up. But if we want to find that somebody's trustworthy, we need to first place trust in them. And we have never done so to the Soviet Union. And so, you know, we looked into the Soviet Union, we looked into what was going on with Stalin and the leaders of the Soviet Union, and we said, oh, we don't agree with those practices. But instead of giving them either the benefit of the doubt or leading by example, instead we mirrored those practices. And so when it came to lies and statecraft and spying, instead of saying, oh, the Soviets are doing this and we're going to be better than that, we just created secret departments that did the same thing and then didn't admit to it for 50, 60 years afterwards.
Harry Dexter White. Yeah, I pulled him up. This is not a name that's well known to me, but just seeing them discussing with John Maynard Keynes at the Bretton Woods conference. Yeah, this is I can definitely see where you're talking about here.
Well, Harry Dexter White was the American who took the ideas of John Maynard Keynes and said that what we had was a problem with not enough money in the world, that it was very important to have trade in the world so we could continue to make things and find larger markets and pass them around the world. You know, John Maynard Keynes was a Brit, and he had come from England or from the UK to represent them at the Bretton Woods conference. His original idea for this world exchange system was for the world exchange system to exist on these two institutions modeled after, say, a treasury and a central bank. So there would be an international treasury and an international bank, but he thought it was very important that they were not denominated in any one country's currency or in gold or silver, because those countries could, because any country, especially the United States, which had the majority of the gold in the world, could begin to take over that system. And so he wanted it to be denominated in an international unit of currency. And the idea at the time was that it would be called the Bancor. And that Bancor, the holdings of Bancors by the countries that were participating in the system would be figured as to what how much investment that they had made in the World Bank.
You know, I wonder if this idea of the Bancor, if some of these same ideas will come back, but as Bitcoin. Because if you read about Bancor and you start to hear how they talked about it, that it would be an international currency, that it would be one that people would hold, that countries would hold. It sure sounds like what Bitcoin is becoming now.
I would agree, although in part of the problem of Bitcoin assuming the role of Bancor, and this is where I think it's also important to think in terms of ETFs and what those are, a basket of assets in which you lay a currency pegged to that basket of assets. So I think it's quite possible that the Bitcoin can have a privileged status as to the inputs or the holdings or the inputs that different countries put into the World Bank. But I think that it would be a better expectation to be looking to carbon credits and the carbon credits serving as a greater denomination as to, and by that you can think about, what is the narrative to all of these democratic governments that come around? Well, if the leaders of a group of people are not taking their right from God or their right from power, then it seems to be that the narrative is they take their right from the amount of jobs that they create. And if they're jobs that they create, like listen to the narrative of the political candidates that we have today. Well, we need, in order to have jobs, we got to have more energy. We got to have more energy. And believe, whatever you believe in climate change, there is a problem. There is a problem with that system, and you can think about it outside of the existential argument in terms of climate change. And you say some people, what happened to the American dream of owning your house and not having to be in constant debt and running on a system that runs on debt, because those notions of the political expediency of is making more things, keeping people working all the time. There needs to be some sort of alternative, but in order to do so, we're going to have to change the narrative for how this world system works, and right now it runs on, well, make more things and sell them to more people. This is also why I'm very I think that Trump is 100% right to be talking about tariffs, because in some ways tariffs is stopping this notion of an unlimited amount of markets to be selling something to. And
When you started talking about energy and carbon credits, it made me think about this announcement that I heard recently. And we've seen these announcements from a variety of the different big tech players, from Microsoft. I think Facebook also had some announcement where they're putting their data centers next to nuclear is definitely being viewed as like the next wave. We've got the next generation of nuclear reactors that are coming online. I think this was announced yesterday, where Google is saying they're partnering up with Kairos Power, and they're going to build a bunch of these smaller style nuclear reactors that are going to go right next to the data centers. This to me is pretty big news if you really catch on to what's happening here. That we are using increasingly more energy, and this usage of nuclear power, I think this counts as very, very green energy, the way that a lot of the ESG folks would add up the numbers.
Well, and I do think that this is going to be the wave of the future, the breaking of the grid, not just the breaking of the grid too, but also some things that are heavily reliant on energy, whether that be server banks or whether that be steel mills. It will be. I think we move to a world in which they have their dedicated sources of energy, and I think that's probably a good thing, because this notion of energy as a utility, in some ways, is a nice promise to make to the people of a country, but I don't think it's played out as equitable Yeah, there I said it. As equitable as some people thought that it would be. So I don't know if I have anything to put.
Sorry to derail us off of that, but like I know we kind of wandered into this from talking about the Bancor, how energy policy and carbon credits might be more aligned towards a way to establish an international currency. It just this is something that seemed like it was an appropriate time to bring it up, because if we're talking about carbon credits or we're talking about carbon, there are certain emissions of carbon that are happening. But if we think about things like nuclear power, which seems to be the trend for almost all the big tech that is involved in the US and even further abroad, we seem to be seeing a big shift into nuclear. So I wonder how that would play out if it really was carbon. You've got these non-carbon sources of energy that seem to be becoming very popular. And I know even from like the 1960s, there were people who were big proponents of nuclear power, and it seemed like we lost our way on that. And I don't know if that was the capture of big oil and other interests that didn't really want to see that happen. But now it seems like, given where we are with some of the climate change, ESG, and some of these other things, that this is coming right back into the center of the world's attention.
You know, I'm dubious of the promise of, and I like to say nuclear solutions, because I think it's not so much the source of energy that's at issue here, but the notion of unlimited supply. And I think back to I think it was the Nixon and Nikita Khrushchev conversations in a kitchen, and the Nixon saying, "Well, American housewives don't have to beat an egg by hand anymore, and American housewives don't have to do this anymore." And yet I what is the curse of the modern American is what do? They sit at home and play video games all day? Do they continue to drink Dr. Peppers and eat Twinkies and have nothing to do? So I think that we actually want to do something, but we want to have the choice to do so. So whenever it comes to nuclear, I just try to not be I try to remember that I think this is actually about notions of unlimited supply, and I think that's sort of a different conversation. We can rely on technology, but there are underlying questions of what do we actually want to be doing with our time? How do we want to not be so jealous of our neighbor? And we started this conversation off with the current state of the politics and war, the politics by other means, war.
And I don't think it's any surprise that as we talk about war, the current state of geopolitical instability, that we would find our way to energy policy. I mean, this is fundamentally what developed nations have that underdeveloped nations don't have, is a strong production of energy. Because as soon as you have a strong production of energy, your economy can naturally follow from that, because energy is the thing that underpins the rest of the economy. You can't manufacture things, you can't have solid economic development without energy. So I think that this has been one of the arguments, even to tie this back with some of the things that we like to talk about here, how some power plants have gotten put in place where they otherwise would have had trouble getting put in place, because Bitcoin miners want to jump in there and get some of that energy on the cheap. So these things are definitely always going to be a part of the conversation when we're talking about the geopolitical tensions, because energy is that fundamental thing. And I like your idea of saying, well, carbon or somehow related to energy is the way that we are going to need to think about some kind of an international currency. And you definitely hear from the Bitcoin community that this is electric money, this is energy as money. Even Jason Lowry, Major Lowry, who we talk about pretty usually on this show, has said that Bitcoin is energy money, or that this is moving towards the energy money economy.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we did bring the conversation to energy, because it's one thing to fixate on the problems of the world, but I think getting to a conversation about the solutions and what really is at stake and at hand here is a more beneficial conversation. to these notions of how do we get off the addiction of unlimited supply with regards to the political conversations going on around our energy. I think what if we also think back to this notion of the international denominator of the dollar and how it was caustic. It was one thing to provide some means of an artificial limited supply to the other countries of the world, but we weren't able to keep our hands out of our own cookie jar, even though the cookie jar now looks like Mary Poppins' bag and has a never-ending bottom of God knows what debt at the bottom of it. But I think what when we begin to think about blockchain and cryptocurrencies and what they bring accounting systems to something to disparate grids and they feedback loops. Like if in one way we can think, what is the soft power that Bitcoin is bringing or that crypto is bringing whenever it's tied to energy production. And think in some ways of how Enron was a very stab at this notion of future markets and energy. But if you could actually bring something that was measuring and apportioning the energy production, like tying proof of work miners to a system too, I think that's where we're going to see. That's where we're going to take steps into better systems in the future. So that's all I got.
All right. We'll talk to you tomorrow.